I'm asking, would you confront a shoplifter? Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has said she would be willing to confront a shoplifter if they were not too big. She said people should not just look away when crimes are committed, or criminals would think they can get away with it. She told Times Radio, I think it depends how big they are, but yes, broadly, it would be my instinct. I think people should look after their personal safety. I think those people who are stronger should do more. So do you agree with that? Well, Matthew Barber is the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner for Thames Valley. Morning, Matthew.
Good morning.
Would you confront a shoplifter?
Yes, I would, and I have. And I have said before that I think people should feel empowered to take to be able to respond to things. Now, that doesn't mean that every person needs to put themselves in harm's way and rugby tackle someone to the ground. But what we have developed, I think, is worryingly the attitude of people just putting their head down, ignoring what might be going on around them and turning a blind eye. And that is not healthy for society. So for some people, the thing they might feel able to do is just calling the police. And that might seem really basic, but sadly, for issues like shoplifting, often people don't even bother to do that. Others will want to verbally confront someone, just shouting "stop thief," something that alerts others to what's going on, rather than allowing people to get away with it. And there will be people who feel that they can physically do more. That will obviously depend on the circumstances they find themselves in. But I think the message here is we shouldn't just turn a blind eye and allow things to happen, whether it's shoplifting or whether it's some other offence. If we want a safe society, of course the police are there to enforce the law, and calling the police should be the minimum that people should do. But if we want a safe, high-trust society, that is something down to all of us. We all have some agency there. If we ignore bad things going on around us, why would we expect other people to stand up if something happens to us?
Let's be honest, though. Shoplifting can happen it can happen in an instant, can't it? How can you assess the situation quickly enough to be able to act?
Well, we assess situations all the time. Those of us who drive are driving around tons of metal, and we have to make split-second decisions to keep ourselves and other people safe. Of course, we all assess risk every day of our lives when we step out of the front door, when we cook a meal. We manage that as human beings, and we should trust people and treat people like adults. Now, people talk about this is particularly in the instance of shoplifting. My challenge to people who say, that's someone else's job, that's the police, that's the store, that's the security guard, those are understandable views. But actually, this is a wider issue here. If you're outside of the store and you see an old lady being mugged for her handbag, do you do nothing? Do you just turn a blind eye? Do you not call the police? Do you not shout to do something? At what point do people think it's okay to intervene? Now, of course, not everybody will feel they can physically intervene. It will depend on those circumstances. It will depend on you, who you are, and it will depend on your risk appetite. But the message here is about just not turning a blind eye and hoping that someone else will do something about it, whether that someone else is a police officer or another member of the public who might call a police officer. If we want that strong society, we all have that responsibility to act.
Yeah, I mean, I was in my local co-op just the other day and I was being served and the alarm went off and the lady serving me looked at me and went, "Oh, they've taken a steak." And I said, "Sorry?" And she said, "Oh, he's just walked out with the steak." And I said, "Okay, does that happen a lot?" She said, "All the time. People come in, they buy something, like a bag of carrots for 60p and they walk out with 3 steaks." And I was like, "Sorry?" And she just carried on serving me. She didn't do anything about it.
Well, and I was just like, is going to be a repeat victim. I don't want staff to have to feel they have to put themselves in harm's way all the time. I don't want that crime to continue. I want the police to be able to do more. We've seen a very good response from Thames Valley Police in terms of dealing with shoplifting. Actually, we've seen recorded shoplifting come down last year. But if that store, if that member of staff doesn't even bother reporting anything, if they just carry on and that person has got away with that steak, I can be pretty sure that person will be back the next week and they'll do the same thing again. And I don't think that's acceptable. And that is obviously a job for the police. But if the police aren't ever even informed of it, how can they take action? So we all have that duty over these what might be considered relatively small things where maybe nobody feels a direct victim because it's the co-op that have lost out in that. But that's just not acceptable. If someone who's willing to steal from the co-op will be willing to steal from your grandmother, this is not a moral equivalence here. Theft is theft. None of us would want our own property stolen. Why should we think it's acceptable if someone does it to someone else?
Now, very often we're told that shoplifting is driven by organised gangs, there's prolific offenders, they steal to order. Why would an individual consider putting themselves at risk when you're up against, an organised gang, for instance?
Well, you certainly do see instances of that. And that's, of course, where you see people's different risk appetite. If you see occasionally, thankfully less so in Thames Valley, but you do see those sort of social media videos of several people balaclava clad coming in heavy-handed to steal something. That is obviously a much more difficult situation, but that's not the sort of situation that you came across in your local co-op, for example.
No.
And I wouldn't for a moment suggest that people should unnecessarily or unduly put themselves in harm's way. But often those scenarios are often excuses for people to not act when they can. At the very minimum, picking up your mobile phone, which most people have got on them, possibly filming it because that's useful evidence, at least calling the police. Call 999. If it's a shoplifting offence, you call 999. It's happening now. There's a much better chance of getting an urgent police attendant and actually catching someone. Just shouting, stop thief. Those really basic things. It doesn't mean you have to rugby tackle every shoplifter to the ground. But if we live in a society where we aren't willing to do something, I think that's a worrying place. And I do always call out that point about what if it's a different type of crime. So shoplifting is an easy one for people to talk about, but people then just sort of move on from the conversation when I say, well, what if it is someone being assaulted? What if you're out for a night out and you see a woman being assaulted by their partner or someone they're out with, and you see a woman being hit in the pub or outside a nightclub? Do you do nothing? Do you just ignore that and walk away and hope that someone else will do something? Or do you feel, actually, I'm going to do the right thing? And that right thing might just be picking up the phone to the police if you don't feel in a position to do something. Or it might be confronting someone and actually doing something to physically intervene. Those are the decisions that people need to make based on the circumstances. But it's the attitude that worries me more of just, well, that's someone else's problem. And if we leave all the problems to someone else in society, then we'll be in a pretty poor place.
Do you think, though, that attitude comes from kind of a lack of trust in the police? I had an instance outside my property several years ago. There was a big fight. We called the police. My car got damaged in the process. And we spent hours giving a statement, only to be called the next day to say, the police weren't taking it any further. And it makes you think, well, next time something happens, why would I call? Because actually, I just wasted my evening and my morning. I didn't get to bed until 6 a.m. and then nothing happened. Do you think actually, as a society, we're kind of doubtful that actually, making that phone call is actually even worth it now?
So it absolutely can be a problem. Undoubtedly, we need to get the system to work properly for people. But every year across Thames Valley, tens of thousands of people will be prosecuted for various offences. It is not as if there is no action taken against criminals. But often where some of those prosecutions fall down is where there isn't a witness or there isn't an adequate report or there isn't the evidence. So we need people to come forward. But this isn't just about policing and the formal systems. It's about what we're willing to tolerate as a society. I think what we want to see in our own towns and villages across Thames Valley, and what is that acceptable level of behaviour. And absolutely, I would agree when the police fail, it's part of my job as Police and Crime Commissioner to make sure they step up. And we improve things. And that's why in the case of shoplifting, for example, we've dramatically increased reports. We've got a much better response to shoplifting offence. We're seeing a much higher proportion of those people being charged. But actually, regardless, we still have that responsibility to do something and report it. And I don't think that the police will do nothing response is a good enough one, because I guarantee the crimes that the police will do nothing about are the ones that aren't ever reported to the police. And, one of my biggest frustrations is people talking about something, complaining about the lack of action. And when I ask them, when did you report it to the police? Because I'm quite happy to take that up and challenge it. It was never reported in the first place. So do the police get it right all the time? Absolutely not. Do we need to continue to strive to do better? Yes. Does that mean that we should all just give up and allow things to happen around us that we think would be unacceptable if we were the victim? No, it doesn't, because I like to think of if my children were out and about somewhere and they become victims of crime, I'd like to think that someone else might step in and look out for them in the same way I'd like to think I would to protect someone else's children. So it's just about the sort of standards that we want to have in society.
Well, Matthew, thank you so much for coming on the programme. It's great to chat to you. That's Matthew Barber, Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner for Thames Valley. So